Erik, thanks for cutting time out in this amazing schedule you've got. I've been watching you run around for, well, we've seen 3 days, but a lot more than that.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. It's certainly always intense, but it's going great. Having a lot of fun.
It's going really well. And I don't know, I've been here quite a few years, but attendance this year seemed really robust.
Yes. You know, over the last, this is the seventh year we've done Surgical Disruptive Technology Summit. You know, we always had kind of the aspirational goal. We'd like to get it to like 200, you know, key participants that really wanted to have an active discussion. That would be kind of the cap. We would sit around that 100 participant range. We got up to close to 150 last year, and we jumped to 300 this year. So 300 registrations this year. Of course, not always 300 people in the room, but still that's a lot. And so now we've kind of hit our limit, and now we got to figure out ways to start, you know, appropriately limiting that and getting the people that really want to be here and keep it intimate, because if we get it really large, then it loses some of its attraction. And you know, what I'm constantly getting reinforced from people that come here is like, this is just a different meeting. It has a different perspective to it. And so we're constantly, as you know, when we have these board discussions, we're constantly trying to figure out, okay, well, what is it that keeps it different? And one of them is that it's not super large and just turns into kind of a, you know, a lecture-based system where everyone just gets up and says a few things, and we really get into the discussion. So.
Yeah, and you've really done a good job, and your board has done a good job of managing that appropriately. In fact, I'm not going to say any names, there are people who've been here in the past, had stood in that podium and make it a commercial for their company. And we stand guard at that this does not become a pitch for your technology. You won't be invited back next year, right? You don't do that, but I think the board sort of manages around that, and that's important.
We want people to share ideas and concepts and certainly sell your ideas, but you know, we understand marketing and advertising. This is a sophisticated audience. They understand those parts of the business, and we don't need to get into that as it relates to, you know, trying to figure out how things are moving forward, you know, in surgical and surgical subspecialties. We need to be able to get to the heart of the concept and then have real discussions about it. But it's also important about really embracing industry, because they get us as providers out of our echo chamber. So we got to always have that balance between, okay, the providers, what are they saying, and industry, what are they saying, and get them to meet in an equal field. And that's what this is all about, trying to create an equal field where everyone feels welcome to speak very, very freely. And it's not, this is all about the industry or this is all about the providers. It's truly a balanced opportunity. And I think that's working. It's because the content creators are from both the arenas, and they want to engage on both sides and really want to learn from each other.
And that's the key is, you know, when I describe this meeting to most people, I'm like, look, there's no sales people here, there's no marketing, there's no booth, so to speak. You have access to the people who are making a difference, you know, in the surgical suite and the OEMs, the number of CEOs that are here and or executive leadership and thought leaders that are sitting in those 300, that Venn diagram of it's not a clinician heavy meeting and it's not an OEM, as it comes together and the conversation occurs right in the middle there. That's very unique.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's something we have to constantly reevaluate and stay on top of, or it just becomes another typical meeting. And the whole purpose of doing this is to stay fresh and to stay engaging in that process. And if we can't do that, then we failed and we should just shut it down. And the key to that is obviously our stakeholders that drive the content, listening to them, and then just getting continual feedback after this meeting and going forward about what to do next.
Any sessions this year that stood out that you were really happy were put on the agenda and sort of showed really well?
Yeah, I mean, it's funny to see how things have changed. I mean, one of my favorites is the idea you came up with, which we call it the Innovators M&M, and I think you said, you know, why don't we show some of the train wrecks? And we don't really present it that way. It's not like people come in and say, oh man, this is a complete disaster. But you know, surgeons, we have a morbidity and mortality conference. We talk about our complications because it's a very important process. It's cathartic to help us understand what we potentially could do better. when we have a complication. And innovators, they go through that process all the time. There's things that didn't go perfectly when they're developing devices and new procedures. And so I just love that session that you moderated this year where you get to hear a whole bunch of people say, well, here's the places where we could have definitely learned and things didn't go perfectly, because it's just, there's hard learning points always when things don't go right. And it's always fun to get up there and say, well, this just went great, but it's actually more fun to hear what we need to learn, because I think those are the messages that really stick with us when you're trying to change clinical practice and drive new procedures and new devices.
Yeah, and that's where the lessons are learned. We always say, look, good and bad ideas start at the same place, but where they end up is really where the lessons are. I also saw on the agenda FDA, right? So we're gonna have an FDA discussion today.
Yes, we've been working hard to try to get the FDA here. They've used various excuses over the years. It's a hard place. You've got a whole bunch of people that want to drive new technology. I understand their potential reticence. Lately, it's been because of the pandemic. They have finally freed up their ability, but they wanted a longer window than we could schedule them in as far as getting them in time. Hopefully, they'll be here next year. We've got a lot of experts and that will be on the panel who've dealt with the FDA a lot, and we'll get plenty of opinions. So I think we'll get some nice substrate to potentially talk to them next year if we can get them here. But I think it's going to be a great session coming up this afternoon.
Well, they're definitely a critical stakeholder in the process. So why would they not be here is the question that we always pose. And they can sort of modulate their conversation to the best of their ability like the rest of us do. Absolutely.
The regulatory environment is continually changing. Certainly the pandemic puts lots of stresses on it. What's happening with CE mark in Europe, there's some changes going on there. How does that shift the relationship between companies going at CE mark versus FDA approval, and where do you go for your initial trials and try to get your initial markets? It's certainly a constantly changing dynamic, and so I think we need to study that and explore that, because obviously it's something that everyone's very interested in.
Yeah, I think the FDA, if they sat in that audience for the last 2.5 days, would learn a lot themselves. I think there's so many aha moments. I know I have a binder I leave here with notes that the FDA will have a more healthy perspective on certain undertakings and where sort of technology is moving. As an example, that reusable single-use panel this morning on the scopes was just enlightening as heck.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's some kind of, when you talk about specifically that one, single-use versus reusable scopes, there's certain things that just kind of percolate up as basic ideas, but a panel like that, they kind of go beyond that. And we have this, I've said this before, we have this problem where we want to oversimplify complex problems, and utilization of reusable scopes versus single-use scopes really kind of dove in and talked about the complexity of it, right? Because it's not just about using the scope once and throwing it away. There's lots of access issues that play into reusable scopes that potentially can be solved with single-use scopes. But there are certainly some challenges in figuring out how to dive into those and deliver good solutions. That's what a panel like that really does. And I think having regulatory hear all that shows that industry truly is committed, I think, to try to figure these problems out, as long as we're bringing them together and we get the clinicians and the industry people talking together.
And that's an exact example of, so DDW was just a couple weeks ago, and I think there were no less than 15 single-use new scope companies there, right? So clearly that's a conversation that needs to be occurring at the FDA. The FDA are really smart. They can't think of everything. And the fidelity of data on that panel this morning even got down to the consciousness of waste and what does that footprint look like. And so these clinicians are really thinking through, as well as the OEMs are thinking through everything in those panels. So it's enlightening. So you've been doing this 7 years now. Why the heck do you do this?
It just kind of pumps me up about the potential future that we have for new procedures. What I get up for in the morning is I want to be able to do something new that benefits patients. And if you're an active clinician, you see all kinds of problems just percolate throughout your entire day that really have potential solutions. but there are a lot of work to get through them. But an environment like this, it kind of pumps me up. It makes me feel excited that yes, there's things we can actually solve and move forward with. Like the digital analysis stuff. I mean, just how that's changed over the last 3 years. Oh my gosh! I mean, we had 24 different device options and potential products being discussed in a yesterday morning session. Talk about regulatory. How does that fit into that? But they're all developing specific solutions now, gone way beyond just concepts and talking about specific solutions around analyzing what's going inside the operating room suite, inside the patient, with the cameras, with the robot, without the robot, with visualization, with improving visible spectrum, EMR analysis, all these things that drive efficiency and clinical safety, and just improvement of the whole process as it relates to the patient and the surgeon. So everyone gets through that experience of a very intense experience of getting surgery. That all runs much better and much smoother for everybody. I mean, you want to be involved in places and with groups that are trying to do that work, and this is a place for that. And so if we keep that going, then I'll want to keep doing it.
That's a great example of why this event's so important, because it's not a siloed opinion that you would get at an industry show where the OEMs are or the clinicians are. Is that whole ecosystem sort of gets explored to a certain extent, and it's sort of a weekend MBA, if you will, that if not before you wouldn't get.
Absolutely. So you get industry will get together and be talking to themselves, but not always hearing what they need to hear. And we do it the same way on the clinician side. We get together and tell the industry to get in the back of the room and just kind of give us the money and to support the meeting and don't really say much. And that's where we miss out. If we don't have those loud voices saying, okay, well, these are the challenges on our side and these are the challenges on our side, we're not going to make progress nearly as quickly. So let's get them out of their own echo chambers, get them in one room together, and that's what we're trying to do.
Well, I thank you so much. I know you're super busy. You probably have another panel, I think, very shortly. And I appreciate it. I know the industry really appreciates this event as well.
Well, thanks for always as supporting it and helping provide information coming out of it. And I look forward to continuing working with you, Joe.
You got it. Thanks so much, Eric. This is Joe Mullings, SDTS in Houston. Be well.